1.
Welcome to Actionable Intelligence. I'm Eric Greitens, and I'm honored to be with you tonight. We've got a strong show lined up for tonight. In just a minute, we're going to be talking with Navy SEAL and former Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke. And later, we're going to bring you video of alleged criminal voter fraud on behalf of Democrats in Texas. You'll be able to watch the video and judge for yourself. And then we'll be talking with actor and filmmaker Kirk Cameron about ongoing political attacks on people of faith. So let's get to work. You know, folks, a lot of America is wild. It's a wild country, open land, and it's been that way since the beginning of the Republic. It was part of what drew settlers to this country in America's earliest days. We were a new country with a wild, open frontier. That open land is still enjoyed today by tens of millions of hikers, hunters, fishermen, outdoorsmen. The family camping trip or a visit to one of America's great national parks is, for many families, one of their treasured memories. Now, to listen to some on the left, you'd think that hunters and fishermen don't care about the environment. But in fact, the country's hunters and fishermen are often those most in touch with the land. And the money generated by hunting and fishing licenses goes towards a whole host of conservation programs. The president had this to say about his administration's environmental work.
For years, politicians told Americans that a strong economy and a vibrant energy sector were incompatible with a healthy environment. In other words, one thing doesn't go with the other, and that's wrong because we're proving the exact opposite. A strong economy is vital to maintaining a healthy environment.
Now, just one look at some of the accomplishments from the Department of the Interior reaffirms the president's promise to keep wild America wild while reducing the burdensome red tape that so often stifles innovation. Over the past 4 years, the Department of Interior cut red tape and reduced regulatory costs at a spectacular rate. In just fiscal years 2017 and 2018, the department reduced the regulatory burden by more than $6 billion. Those policies, combined with others, have helped to make America energy independent under the Trump administration. So how are they able to do this while maintaining strong conservation principles? Well, good leadership helps. Ryan Zinke, a hunter and a fisherman himself, led the president's Interior Department, and he updated the approval process for infrastructure and energy projects on federal lands. He cut regulations from thousands of pages to just 150. And Zinke's America First energy policies have turned the United States into an energy exporter and increased federal energy revenues by more than $3 billion. Under Zinke's tenure, the Interior Department allowed hunting and fishing on more than 5 million acres of federal land. But Zinke's time with the department is only a small part of his story. Zinke also served as a United States Navy SEAL for over 2 decades, and he's the first Navy SEAL and the first Montanan since statehood to occupy a cabinet position. Throughout his decorated military career, Zinke led thousands of troops in the global war on terrorism, and he trained thousands of Navy SEALs. I remember because I was one of them, and Zinke had me doing a lot of push-ups. We're honored to have Ryan Zinke join us today. Ryan, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, great always to be with you again, Eric. And by the way, you were a pretty good student.
Thanks, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. So look, Ryan, in true Navy SEAL fashion, you know, people have been talking about energy independence for decades. We hadn't been able to achieve it. You came into office and you said, not only are we going to have energy independence, you said, we're going to have American energy dominance, and we are on the path to achieving that. Why was that so important to you?
Well, when we came in, we were about 8.3 million barrels a day and declining. When I left, we were 12.5 million barrels a day and rising. And why is it important? Well, first, environmentally, look, it is better to produce energy in this country than watch it get produced overseas with no regulation. Our regulatory scheme, I think, is appropriate, but if you want to see environmental damage, look at the way they're producing energy in Africa or the Middle East. And secondly, you got to have an economy. The president is exactly right. Rich countries can afford great regulation, good environmental policies. And if you're poor, you simply can't afford to do what you need to do. And we were criticized by the radical left for making an energy policy that ultimately we won't have to send our kids, like you and I did, Eric, overseas and fight for someone else's energy. So I will say environmentally, morally, and economically, it is the right policy. And let me add this. We weren't just oil and gas. The Trump administration, we unleashed the power of America to make choices. The largest offshore wind lease in the history of this country, the largest onshore lease in New Mexico. Look, we're all the above, but Made in America is cleaner, better, and wiser.
And not only did you do this, Ron, I mean, not only did you help to lead this effort towards American energy dominance, but, for people on the left who were so critical of this administration, you guys also rebuilt America's park system. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
The largest investment in the history of this country to address our national parks and forest infrastructure. When I came in, the Park Service unanimously said, what's the biggest problem? They said infrastructure. Our roads are falling apart. Our bridges are falling apart. We don't have enough money to maintain trails. So we looked at it. I was the architect, proud that the president said yes and said, we're going to rebuild our park system. We're going to make sure that the trail system's open. And look, the radical left, they talk about public access, but they don't want you on public land. It is unbelievable the amount of flack that we took for opening up wildlife refuges for what? Hunting, opening up fishing opportunities, and opening up public land which belongs to the public so the public can enjoy it.
Yeah, and Ryan, one of the things that you also did, in addition to opening up public lands, look, you're joining us from Montana today, from your home state. I'm from Missouri. One of the things that you also did when you came to D.C. was that you actually made sure that you pushed power out away from D.C. You got it out into the hands of people who are on the front lines around the country. Talk a little bit about the fight that you had to engage in to actually reorganize the Interior Department and push a lot of that power out of D.C. and back to the states and local communities.
Well, look, if you don't know where the Yellowstone River is or the Tongue River is, how do you think you can manage it? Washington, D.C. is arrogant, they're condescending, and they believe they're in the best position to manage our public lands. I have never been an advocate for selling or transferring public lands. Absolutely. But I am an advocate for managing it. We can't afford to have spend billions of dollars fighting forest fires when we should be better stewards of the land. And there are this radical group that just simply would rather have the whole forest burned down than harvest a single tree. In context, there's billions of board feet that are lying on our forest floors rotting, and yet we import lumber into this country. There are those that simply would like to bubble wrap our public land so our citizens can't use it. And you look at, bikes, and not everyone can walk in. And I'm getting old, you're still young, but there's veterans out there that are disabled. There are older folks that would like to take their grandchildren hunting. And look, you need access to our public lands. And, just today, I was reading that here again, these radical groups in, Center for Biological Diversity and others that are challenging the decision to open up public lands for hunting and fishing. And on the premise that somehow lead shot is a threat to birds. If you want to talk about birds, look at wind. Wind chops up at least 750,000 birds, non-discretionary every year, but they ignore that and rather spend time making sure that hunters that pay for, by the way, conservation, over $1 billion.
When we come back, I want to get your thoughts on how hunters and fishermen contribute to the environmental agenda. And folks, we're also going to talk with Ryan Zinke about some of his experience as a Navy SEAL serving this country as well. Stay right with us. Welcome back to Actionable Intelligence. I'm Eric Greitens, and we're going to continue our conversation with former Navy SEAL and Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke. Ryan, just before the break, we were talking about hunters and fishermen and their contribution to the environment. You're a hunter, a big fisherman yourself. Talk with our audience, if you would, about why it's so important that the country recognizes the contribution that hunters and fishermen make to conservation.
Well, fiscally, the hunters and fishermen, every time you buy a fish hook or a box of ammo, it goes in an account and it's distributed. Well over $1 billion every year goes to conservation projects. The conservation ethic of North America is the model for the rest of the world, hands down. We monitor our species, we make sure the flyways are healthy, and the hunters and sportsmen are out there protecting the lands that all of us use. I wish the same could be called for those hikers that, I think if hunters have to pay into the conservation, I think, hikers and campers should do much the same, right? I think that's up to Congress to make sure that there's some equity in there so we all benefit from the public lands that we love.
Now, Ryan, what are the things that you did when you were announced as President Trump's Secretary of the Interior after you were confirmed on your first day and you actually rode a horse in to office? One of the reasons why you did that was that you wanted to demonstrate your solidarity with the men and women who are out there in public service on the front lines. Talk a little bit about why that's so important to you.
Well, the U.S. Park Police is among the oldest law enforcement entities in our nation.
Yes.
They're the ones you see in the mall, they're riding around, and there are great people out there every day. The other reason I rode a horse in is I wanted to make sure that people knew the West should have a say. Those of us that are out there in Montana and the West, a lot of times there is a tension involved when the federal government comes in and overrides the state, overrides local communities, and simply turns a deaf ear. And a lot of times, people that live in the community, that work in the forest, they should have a say about how land is managed, to make sure the trails are maintained, make sure public access is there. But when you're continually shutting gates, you're continually not allowing the public to utilize those lands that belong to all of us, what we're doing is we're creating the next generation has less opportunity. And look, no one loves public land more than I do. You can love it as much, but you can't love it anymore.
Right.
We got to make sure that our young kids out there have an experience. Statistics will say if you don't get a hook in by 12, it's more difficult as this next generation gets older to protect the very legacy that our fathers gave us on public land. So get them out there, get hiking, and mountain bikes. The Wilderness Act, was a great compromise, right, between the preservationists, the ranchers, the cattlemen, and the hunters. But it's a triad, and when gates are closed, where you no longer can graze, the consequence in many cases is these catastrophic forest fires. You got to reduce the amount of fuel in the forest so you don't burn up 300,000 acres. If you want to manage forests, then have prescribed burns in the shoulder season rather than the peak season. Make sure you can harvest timber in a sustained manner, and make sure you manage our public lands to be good stewards in perpetuity.
And that's all common sense to people who have an affinity with and an understanding of the land. It's obviously not common sense in Washington, D.C., but it's common sense for a lot of people who've grown up in and around the land. You spent a lot of time focused on kind of bringing back regulations that just didn't make sense. But I know, you and I have talked about this, that was a big fight to kind of change this massive regulatory regime that just didn't make sense. Talk a little bit about how you fought that and why it was so important to roll back some of those regulations that just didn't make sense to people who were on the ground.
Well, let me give you a short story that I think highlights. Let's say you have a trout and a salmon in the same stream, right? Upstream, you have a dam. Downstream, you have Forest Service. This is how it's managed. The trout are managed by Fish and Wildlife Service, the Department of Interior. The salmon are managed by Department of Commerce through NOAA. Upstream dams are either the Department of Army by Army Corps of Engineers or Bureau of Reclamation. Forest Service land, the surface is managed by Department of Agriculture. Subsurface is BLM, that's Bureau of Land Management.
Right.
You're going to have the same stream with two fish managed by multiple departments with multiple leaderships, multiple missions in different regions. So what I did is the same model of what SOCOM, the same model of our combatant commanders,
Right.
is look, we're going to focus on three things: recreation, conservation, and permitting. And we're going to do it jointly. So you can have somebody who's going to be in charge.
All right. So that brings me to another question, right? So given your experience, you just made the analogy, like what was harder, being a SEAL Team 6 commander fighting in the global war on terrorism or taking on the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C.?
It was easier being a SEAL Team 6 commander, because at least the SEAL Team 6 commander, most of the rounds came from the front, and if you got really upset, you could take someone out. In the interior, most of the rounds come from behind. You know, and this battle we face, I think, couldn't be any clearer. You have on one side power and control and institution. And you have the other side is freedom, the Constitution, and family. You cannot replace the family with institutions. And power, it has to come with a responsibility, but the Constitution's about individual freedom, it's not the collective. And what we're seeing is the collectivism enunciated or enumerated by socialism, globalism. Somehow they think, for the benefit of the many, that our individual rights should be diminished. And that's the foundation of our country. I sit firmly on the freedom side, is that we don't want government to make those decisions. That's why Thomas Jefferson put the government in chains, so the government could not interfere with our rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things that you've also played a really big role in, Ryan, is you've helped other naval special warfare personnel, other special operators, like actually get involved in public life, get involved in their communities, get involved in the fights in Congress, help to fight some of these battles in Washington, D.C. Give our audience just a sense for some of the work you've done through SEAL Pack and your ability to kind of bring some of these other guys into the fight.
Well, like you, Eric, I'm red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
I never asked whether the soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine next to me was a Democrat or Republican.
Right.
I don't care.
Right.
What I care about is, do you love your country? Are you focused on mission? Are you striving to be as good as you can for not only yourself but your team? And that's America.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes I think those of us who have served, have the same viewpoint. They don't see life through a blue or red lens. And I think it's important to have some balance when you're considering bills, and being in politics in Washington, D.C. is tough. Right now it seems like the sides are divided up between teams. In many cases, the referees are wearing jerseys and calling the plays. I think the government's job is to be a referee and not call plays, and definitely not wear the uniform of one side or the other. But I'm proud. SEAL Pack has helped recruit. We find good candidates. We find people that love America, that give a damn about this country's future and our children's future. And then we find donors to help, and we introduce donors to candidates. And we've done very, very well. Rob O'Neill is the current chair. I was the founder.
Let's remind all of our viewers, Rob O'Neill, the man who shot Osama bin Laden, a good friend of yours and mine. So go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. So there's a number of SEALs that are doing great things. Dan out of Texas has done amazing things. Great campaign video with Dan.
That was awesome.
Yep. I think Taylor's going to win again in Virginia, and there's others that are helping. It doesn't matter what you're SEAL.
It's an awesome brotherhood, and Ryan, you've done a fantastic job of keeping a lot of the guys together. We appreciate you. Our viewers appreciate you. That's Ryan Zinke, folks, Navy SEAL, former Secretary of the Interior, and a great patriot. We'll be right back.